People who have followed me on this channel for a long time, like pre-Werewolf era, might remember there was a time where I made a really controversial video about how I prefer the live-action Uzumaki movie over the manga. I followed this by watching most, if not all, of the film adaptations of Junji Ito's work. From the animated acid trip that is Gyo to the live-action nightmare that was The Long Dream. But one series of films remained painfully elusive, and I really wanted to talk about it because it's a series of stories that actually really interests me. Now, I'm happy to say that thanks to this YouTube channel on the screen and the Internet Archive, I finally found them all, and I'm ready to talk about the terrifying beauty of Tomei. If you've never heard of it, Tomei is a series of stories by horror master Junji Ito about a girl named Tomei who is violently murdered for a variety of reasons, but almost always rooted in jealousy, and then forgotten until she seems to return from the dead without any explanation and seemingly capable of manipulating everyone around her. She's also incredibly violent and vengeful on the people who killed her to begin with, often destroying their entire lives before ending them. Over time, as horror tends to do, it gets more and more ridiculous as she becomes a terrifying monstrosity capable of molecular regeneration and even in one case reproduction by budding. We're not quite there, though. We're going to start here with Tomei, released in 1998. It was also filmed in 1998, and man, that shows in a bad way. It looks like a VHS tape that's been played several dozen times, and I don't even want to think about the budget based on the visuals here, but I can't imagine it was a lot. All of that being said, one of the reasons that I love adaptations of Junji Ito's work is that they manage to take his deranged need to constantly scale up the horror and make it manageable. Does this movie manage that? Not really. Honestly, this movie is a weird one. It's slow, near nonsensical at times, and while there's a clear gem of an idea in there, it is buried deep in some bad decisions. Hell, most summaries and recaps that I could find for this movie only describe the last 20 or so minutes in any real detail, because that's all you can talk about that isn't A talks to B for an extended period of time. So, come with me, and I will try to safely guide you through the fever dream that is Tomei. We start with a very unusual cold open of a man walking down a sidewalk before opening and gazing into a plastic shopping bag he's been carrying. When we get to look inside, we see a severed human head, the eye of which opens to look at the camera as we go to the opening. Afterward, we follow a girl as she makes her way to meet with friends, one of which immediately leaves when she arrives. The other two then sit and go over pictures that one of them has taken as part of a photography class that they're taking, before our main character, Tsukiko, makes her way home where she's told that someone has just moved in below her. We join this new resident, so far unnamed, as he seems to be taking care of some kind of baby inside of a basket, feeding it sweetly for a short time until a cockroach crawls inside the basket, and after a few moments is vomited out, prompting the man to fall over laughing, asking why it would eat something like that at all. We then rejoin Tsukiko at the doctor's office, where we learn that she seems to be suffering from amnesia caused by an accident 3 years ago, but often dreams of herself being covered in blood. From there, though, we jump to her shopping at a store and walking out to find her bike knocked over and seemingly vandalized, but she can't imagine who would have done it. She then goes to her boyfriend's house for dinner, where he grows agitated as she spends several minutes taking pictures of her food instead of eating it. That night, she struggles to sleep and heads to the kitchen to get a glass of water when the phone starts ringing. She answers it, but there's nobody on the other end. Tsukiko heads to the doctor again for hypnosis treatment, and there mutters the name Tomei. And as if on cue, the doctor is visited by a police investigator named Harada, who arrives to tell the doctor that every student of a particular class has either been killed, gone insane, or transferred schools and disappeared. And the only incident in the class was the death of a girl named Kawakami Tomei, who had been murdered and dismembered. Problem was that Kawakami Tomei had already been killed 3 years prior by someone named Tanabe Koji, but the body had disappeared. Turns out that Tomei was a transfer student at Tsukiko's old school who had caught the eye of Tsukiko's then boyfriend Koji before suddenly being murdered and Tsukiko losing her memory. The biggest issue here is that the murders of Kawakami Tomei don't start or end with Tsukiko. Instead, they stretch back to the 1800s, seemingly defying all logic and reason. And it's on this note that we rejoin Tsukiko at home, where we see that the downstairs neighbors now has a small girl, though he doesn't seem to know how to care for her, as he snaps at her when she refuses to eat, causing her to cry. We join Yuichi, Tsukiko's boyfriend, working in a cramped kitchen of a small restaurant when he receives a phone call, and we learn that he's cheating on Tsukiko with the friend she met at the park at the beginning of the movie. A weird bit of nonsense occurs, but we learn that Harada is watching Tsukiko's apartment complex. We then join back with Tsukiko's neighbor, returning home where he's asked if he killed them by a lady now living in his apartment. He looks down ashamed, seemingly due to his failure, and has nail polish remover thrown into his face, but is then seemingly comforted and berated by the woman, forcing him to beg her not to leave him. She responds by telling him to go to hell. We then learn who the them he was supposed to kill might have been when Harada gets called to a scene of a murder, where we see Kazumi, the girl who left Tsukiko at the beginning of the movie, dead in a riverbank. Meanwhile, at Yuichi's work, a new girl is hired that he seems deeply uncomfortable around. We end up joining Tsukiko and her doctor as they have a session outdoors, where she asks Tsukiko directly if she knows Tomei, the name, at all, which Tsukiko denies but comments that she feels like she should have a very good friend, but can't remember anything about her besides a beauty mark under her eye. When the doctor brings up Koji, she comments that he was her boyfriend, but left her soon after the accident that cost her memory, leading the doctor to tell her that it may be better to just let it go, to live on with her new boyfriend and photography, but Tsukiko refuses, saying that she'd like to go back to her past. Harada then invites the doctor to the police station with him to sit in as he interviews the suspect in the murder of Tsukiko's friend. It's the man who has been living beneath Tsukiko, a man we now learn is named Yamamoto, who had disfigured himself while in hospital and was in the same class as Tsukiko and Tomei back then. He says that he found Tomei's headless body, but it had still been alive, and the detective shares that the reason he keeps investigating this was that he believes that Tomei is not a human being, rather some kind of monster that would be reformed from its corpse when killed. And because of this belief, he would like to meet her, just once. As the doctor leaves, the detective shares one more piece of important information. Tomei is coming for Tsukiko, and she wants her dead. At Yuichi's work, all of the men are acting weird, either fighting amongst themselves or seemingly delirious, and Yuichi seems to think it's entirely because of the new employee. Back home, Tsukiko is developing her negatives when her friend from the beginning, who is cheating with her boyfriend, seems to come by to talk about the death of their other friend, but she backs down and leaves. As she does though, the lady living beneath Tsukiko follows her. The friend calls Yuichi at work, who answers before being confronted by the new employee when all of the lights go out at the restaurant. It's here in the dark that we get our first glimpse of the girl, seemingly trying to openly seduce Yuichi, who tells her flat out that she's driving everyone there crazy. I refuse to interject with my gushing of how amazing the lady who plays Tomei is, personally picked and coached by Juji Ito for this role, by the way, because it'll sound crazy thirsty, but man, she is incredible in this. The next day, the detective is called in to find most of the staff of the restaurant slain, with 2 people still missing. Yuichi, and a part-time student that isn't named, but is seen distorted in the glass to be Tomei. As Tsukiko is leaving her place, she notices that the manager's place on the first floor has its door open. She goes to investigate and finds her friend murdered in his bathroom. She's then attacked from behind by her landlord and drowned, during which she has flashbacks of people bullying Tomei and calling her a monster, before vividly remembering Tomei's brutal murder by her then boyfriend. We suddenly find ourselves and Tsukiko in the doctor's office, when instead of the doctor she's been seeing, she's being tended to by Tomei, who sits with a terrifying smile and blank eyes. Her boyfriend is also there, seemingly under the influence of Tomei, as he refuses to look at her or acknowledge her. Tomei reveals that she's been looking for Tsukiko for a long time, because she hates her. Tsukiko had been the one who spread the pictures of Tomei long ago, calling her a monster. I can't not talk about how incredible this is. The camera zooms in to allow the actress's face to fill the entire screen and sits on it in darkness. Her blank eyes is seemingly practiced, almost unnatural control of her facial muscles is unnerving to watch. She's perfect for this role. Tomei and Tsukiko spend a long, uncomfortable time simply talking about everything and nothing all at the same time. Tomei talks about how poorly Tsukiko's life will be and how she'll be young and beautiful forever because she's not like Tsukiko. She's a monster, before explaining that she's taken Tsukiko's current boyfriend too, but also reveals that he was cheating on her, so maybe not that bad. She then breaks into angry screaming about how Tsukiko ruined her life before causing her murder, and proceeds to laugh cruelly as she forces her to consume a cockroach. Seemingly reminded of who he is by a picture of them together, Yuichi rises from the floor and murders Tomei, before freeing Tsukiko and telling her to flee. The detective arrives shortly after, but Tomei's corpse is already gone, and he laments that he was unable to see her again. Tsukiko meanwhile drives long into the night, having taken Tomei's body to discard it in the woods, but as she attempts to move her, Tomei's headless body stands up and Tsukiko flees. We then jump to the greenest stock I've ever seen in any movie ever. I can't tell if the implication is that Tsukiko was running for hours, if this is supposed to be day for night lighting, or what, but this is all interrupted by the arrival of a clean and living Tomei, who tells Tsukiko that they'll always be together, since they're friends. But Tsukiko screams that they aren't friends, that she hated Tomei and was happy when she was murdered. This genuinely seems to make Tomei happy to hear, and she says that she has to remind Tsukiko of one final thing, before giving her a kiss and a hug and saying, "I am you, and you are me." Tsukiko and Tomei then burst into laughter together, before Tsukiko takes out a flare and sets Tomei aflame. We then jump ahead a little bit in time, and Tsukiko seems to be doing well, still taking pictures of all kinds of things around town. As she develops them, she comes across a picture of herself with a beauty mark under her left eye that she's never had before. She goes to a nearby mirror to check, and Tomei appears beside her with a wide grin as we go to credits. Okay, so let's address the elephant in the room. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, Jacob, that sounded like a pretty linear, if slow, horror movie. And to that I say, settle down, alright? I purposely cut out a lot of things that are heavily implied or visually confusing, and I swear, if you watch this without paying rapt attention, like most people watch things, it's incredibly easy to get lost in how much time passes in the first hour and how everything rockets up in action in the last 30 minutes. Some would even say that that's a big flaw in Tomei as a movie. Because Tomei isn't in a lot of it, she comes across as much more vindictive and angry than she does in the manga, where she's given time to breathe. And I kind of understand it, since a lot of world building and lore dumping has to be done here, so that hopefully it can be glossed over in the future entries. Oh yeah, there's more of these. And you can be darn tootin' that your good friend Puggles, not named Jacob, Wellington, is going to talk about every single one of them. I won't do this back to back though, because there's 9 of these, and I want to finally do something on time, strike an anvil while it's not ice cold, and talk about Alice in Borderlands before season 2 comes out. And besides all that, if this poll is anything to go by, a lot of you don't know who or what Tomei is, so I think it'll be good to keep things fresh. I hope y'all will continue to stick with me. I love you all. Good night.